Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Now, I understand that you will be coming to Paris for these climate talks. Are you optimistic?
Well, optimistic compared to Copenhagen, optimistic compared to not having these talks at all, but not optimistic in terms of this being the final word in being able to actually bring global warming under control. I think this would hopefully be the first in a series of steps. The idea being that every 5 years there'd be renewed, tighter commitments based on technological progress, based on financial progress that bind countries into a 2-degree trajectory of bringing global warming under control. In that sense, I'm optimistic that something useful will come out of this.
You mentioned finances. Is it fair to say that one of the main issues is how much measures to combat global warming are going to cost and who pays for them?
That's correct. And it's a particular issue to deal with who is going to pay for the adjustment that is needed by low-income countries. For the middle-income countries such as India and China, this is much less of a problem. And the fact of the matter is that at the end, much of the new investments, for example, in solar and wind and renewables, will have to come from the private sector. But the bone of contention here is whether the $100 billion fund that was agreed in Copenhagen will actually be funded by the rich, the developed countries, that will allow public money, aid money to flow to poorer countries, particularly small island states as well as the least developed countries. And if that number doesn't quite add up, that will become a very serious point of contention.
Now, one of the differences with Copenhagen, which, as we've been reporting, really wasn't much of a success, is the fact that world leaders this time around have been brought in at the beginning, and we've heard speeches from some top world leaders in the last couple of hours. What difference does that make, do you think, if any?
I think it significantly reduces the chance of failure, number one. Number two, it increases the chance that the commitments that have been made, many of which have come through national cabinet discussions or even have parliamentary approval in some countries, will actually be binding. So I think this significantly increases the likelihood of success. At the same time, it creates problems because the commitments are not in a standardized format. So it's almost putting apples and oranges and grapes all in one basket and asking us to count and come up with a mishmash deal. So the deal-making process, it will be tricky, but once it's made, the commitments are more likely to stick.
Now, we've been talking a lot about this 2-degree Celsius limit. As far as I understand, it already looks like that's going to be incredibly difficult to achieve. Why this focus on the 2 degrees?
It is supposed to be the level beyond which climate change and global warming's impact start taking catastrophic proportions. It is somewhat an arbitrary limit. There are people who say 1 degree is already too much, and others that say even 3 degrees, 4 degrees is survivable. But the fact of the matter is we are already starting to see distributional impacts, particularly areas around the equatorial zone are becoming more arid. There is more rainfall elsewhere. We've seen warming of the global seas. The effects are very clear, whether it's 2 or 2.5 or 3, that will be up to the scientific community. It is important to limit temperature rise to as little as possible. That is what we must do.
All right, thank you very much for your time. Sony Kapoor from the think tank Redefine.